When we're adding laterals to the E2 back, this is again the standard contour, the first thing we have to do is remove the bolts that hold the pin assemblies on board, because we're going to be changing to a slightly longer bolt, so we have enough distance to go through, pass through the hardware slotting, the metal aspect of the lateral, and the shell, and still attach it. So we're basically using the exact same attachment point that we are using for the pins, so we need a little bit more length with the bolt. So the first thing I'm going to do is loosen these, pull these off, and so there's a little a threaded piece on the inside of this that we'll be reutilizing, but I'm going to remove those short bolts. And if you'll bear with me, I'm going to go ahead and attach one lateral right now, because I want to show you the setup for having an offset out on the outside of the shell or an inset version. So I'm going to use this exact same assembly, pin assembly, but now what I'm going to do is place one of my laterals is going to be on the inside here, on the outside of the shell, underneath the pin assembly. So I'm going to put it back together in this fashion. And I'm going to use my slightly longer bolts that were sent. So those are going to be in the same bag with your laterals. And these are 22 millimeters tapered heads. So this is how we're going to be basically just reutilizing the same hardware and still be able to offset both the lateral in relationship to the orientation on the back, and the pin assembly will still be adjustable. So if I bring this a little bit forward, okay, so I'm gonna get the bottom one, started to thread that inboard, and now I take my other bolt, this top attachment, get that lined up, and I start to thread that into the top receiver in the assembly. And that's how I'm going to have both my lateral and my pins. But you can see I've mounted this lateral on the outside of the shell. Now the other side, we'll remove that, and what I'm going to do is mount the other lateral inset. So let's imagine that we had a consumer, if we had a little bit of a scoliosis that was more fixed, and I wanted to just extend this a bit, offset to their C-curve, and I would need to bring this in a little bit closer to them. So that might be a great example of having one on the outside of the shell and one that'll be on the inside of the shell and closer to the consumer's torso. Okay? So the next thing, before I get this all lined up, I'll take these short bolts out of the other side. And then I'll have grab my longer bolts, and this will be lining up my lateral on the inside of the shell behind the foam. There's my thread plate. So this will be on the inside of the shell here. Okay, so lateral on the inside of the shell. Now I've got my longer bolt, so the coved part of the overlay on top of the pin assembly. Line that up. And I kind of like to hold this a little bit more even, if I can, balance it all together and get this tightened in. Once you get the threads started, a few turns, bring my pin interface over and bring that little top overlay bar, line that up to the threading on the inside of the receiver. And now we're going to attach this all together. And we'll see how this finishes. Okay, so now I have both of the Easy Fix laterals attached to my E2 standard contour back. And I have mounted one on the outside of the shell. So it kind of steps it outboard a little bit. And you can see how the pin assembly is on the top of that. And it's a little bit loose right now. And on the other side, I've mounted my Easy Fix lateral on the inside of the shell, underneath the foam, and you can still see how the pin assembly is still attached here, okay? And the idea with this is that if these are loose, let me just back this off just slightly, so it should still give me the ability to make adjustments, perhaps with my pin orientation up and down, but also moving my lateral up and down in relation to the shell a little bit. And so now I'm going to put this on a chair so you can kind of see how we can offset it using the Easy Fixed Laterals. Okay, so now we have our E2 back with the Easy Fixed Laterals mounted, and I'm going to just show you again, we have on this consumer left side, we have the lateral mounted on the exterior of the shell, so it steps it outboard a little bit. And on the consumer right side, we have the lateral mounted on the inside of the shell, so it's in a little bit closer. And now I'm just going to loosen up our attachment point. So remember, these 4 bolts here, not only am I going to be able to, it would allow me to move my pin assembly, but I'm just going to back them up enough to be able to loosen and move my lateral. So let's come in here with our Allen wrench. Let's say we had somebody with some asymmetry and we really wanted, let's say, to get this lateral down lower. So I've loosened that up. I should be able to slide my lateral through this channel. Let's, as a matter of fact, let's see if I can bring the lateral pad upboard. You can see, you can raise it up a pretty good height on this side, and I'll bring it down a bit through that slotting. So you can see my height fine tuning that I have with the lateral mounted on the exterior. So once I have this orientation in relation to the consumer's body where I really want it, then I'm going to tighten those 2 bolts again. And then I'll show you a side view of what this is going to look like. All right. So for that height adjustment. And now we'll look at the other side that's mounted on the interior of the shell and how we'll do the same thing. Loosen these 2 bolts again. These are the same bolts that, of course, that we used when we were just making back height adjustments. I could still change my back height adjustment if I had all 4 points a little bit loose. But right now it's just about getting our laterals properly oriented. Okay, so I want to get a little bit closer to this and show you. So I've got these pretty loose here on this side. I'm just going to stabilize the back, and now I'm going to move my lateral. And I can bring my lateral down through the slotting. This is when it's mounted, of course, on the inside, and I can bring it up through this range. So let me turn this to the side, and you can kind of see how that actually finishes for the consumer. And again, I can bring this up or down through the slotting. And I make sure I still have everything lined up where I want it to be, wherever it's going to be the most appropriate, and then I can tighten those, come back in, back straight, tighten my 2 bolts on that side. You have the back with the laterals added on for the consumer.